Hello and welcome to Melee's Turn Wheel, the series that takes a retroactive look at the Fire Emblem series chapter by chapter. I'm your host, I'm Melee Kirby, and today we're taking it back to chapters 3-6, 3-7, and 3-8 of Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn. Yeah, so it's been a bit, not that long. I've definitely had longer gaps in between episodes. I've been tweeting a little bit about this on Blue Sky, tweeting on Blue Sky, yeah, whatever, you guys get what I mean. And I'll talk a little bit more at the end of the episode about sort of what happened, what has been consuming my life for the past month or so. But in the meantime, I figured I'd sit down and record an episode. I'm hoping to get to the end of part 3 pretty soon. I think we're on good pace to get that done relatively quickly. Especially since the part 3 chapters that we have left, some of them are quite fun and some of my favorite chapters in the game. So I'm looking forward to that, including one of the ones we're going to be talking about today, which may come as a surprise for some people, but we'll see. I don't know. I might have some hot takes for you guys this episode. I'm not 100% sure. Anyway, before we get into any of that, though, let's talk about the answers to last episode's question, which was, who is your favorite Beast Laguz? So I got one response via email from Darkray, who says, I'm going with Volug. He just feels so fun to use. Would throw him around the map like a mini Titania off on solo missions. And yes, Volug is absolutely a lot of fun to use, especially early on when he still fits into that Jagan type mold when his stats are really good. He can handle a lot of those solo missions by himself. I actually want to talk a little bit about Volug a little bit later in the episode, because as I've said before, I am using him in this playthrough, and he has been putting in a lot of work, and he's been an absolute blast to use, so I'm excited to get to that. But yeah, in the meantime, for now, I'll say I agree. I think Volug is very fun. Speaking of people who said Volug, I got a couple responses from Blue Sky, one of them being from Crypto, with how many O's is that? 6 O's. Who says probably Volug because he has epic stats in part 3. I don't know if I agree with that part, actually. I mean, I did just say that Volug is doing pretty well, better than I expected him to. But I don't know if I would say his stats are particularly good in part 3, but hey, he's definitely workable and has been a lot of fun for me, so maybe he does have epic stats. The other response from Blue Sky was from Drano, who says, has to be Nyla, coolest eye patch in the series. FE has had some amazing eye patch wearers over the years. Dimitri, so kudos to the Radiant Dawn character designers for going so hard on her design. Yes, Nyla's design is incredible. Alright, and then over on Spotify, we got a couple comments, one of which was from Solaris. Favorite Beast Laguz, if extremely biased, Nyla, for obvious reasons. Otherwise, it has to be Kanegas. He's exactly what I'd picture a Lion King to be in aesthetic and personality. Also, that one Laguz King meeting where his sandals manifest into existence as he transforms lives rent-free in my head. That is a very good scene. Also, for obvious reasons, Nyla being your favorite, I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. There's no clue whatsoever what you could be referring to there. But I agree completely. From Josh Jansen 11, favorite Beast Laguz is probably King Kanegas. He has a good build-up in Path of Radiance as a super powerful Laguz, and the moment he becomes a playable character in Radiant Dawn was amazing. Ooh, spoilers. Not really. I'm sure most of you guys have played Radiant Dawn by now. But yeah, Kanegas does become playable. I might have even mentioned that, actually. So, with that said, I need to make up my mind now, and that's gonna be tricky. Let me just bring up, a list, because I have a couple that I'm, debating between, and spoilers, I guess, it's between, I think it's mostly between the ones that have already been mentioned, but I will double-check the list, just to make sure I'm not forgetting about anybody that I really like. Unfortunately, rare time, the fandom wiki comes in clutch over the other wiki, the better wiki, because they have a full list here for the Beast Tribe Laguz. So let's see, we got Ranulf, Leaf, Liar, Kesda. Actually, this guy keeps coming up. I know who this is. I was going to talk about him later, but anyway, yeah, it's Kesda, guys. Kesda is my favorite Beast Laguz. Mordecai, Morim, Kiza, Pain and Agony, Kanegas, Skrimir, Gifka, Soen, Solhot? I actually don't know who that is. I'll check that out real quick. And then Nyla and Volug for the Wolves. As a background character in the Tellius series, he was of the Lion Clan and was the first ruler of Gallia. With the support of Goldoa, the land of the Dragon Tribe Laguz, he established Gallia as a country in the year 355. Interesting. I did not remember him. If he came up before, then I forgot. Maybe he'll come up later. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I could go a lot of different ways on this. I think for me, it definitely comes down to one of the 3 playable lions, because I love all of them for very different reasons. I like Skrimir. I think he has a really cool arc over the course of the game. I think Gifka is just very, he has a lot of aura, and I like using him in Path of Radiance a lot. And then Kaenagis is just cool, chill guy, who I like a lot, and has this awesome character design and some good story moments over the course of the games. So it's definitely one of them. I'm leaning towards Gifka, just because I do have that personal attachment to him, sticking out, picking him for the final Ashnard encounter in my first playthrough of Path of Radiance is still one of the most memorable moments of any of my initial Fire Emblem game playthroughs, because of just how much he stands out in my mind for how effective he is in that role. And I also just think he's a fun unit to use in Radiant Dawn as well, where he's so strong that even though he's not a Royal Laguz, he's sort of lumped in with them at the same time, which I think is sick. So yeah, I think I'm leaning towards Laguz, but both Skrimir and Kaenagis are very close. Nyla as well. I think, ask me again in 6 months and maybe I'll change my mind to a different one of those other 3. But anyway, really good choices all around. There are really no bad picks for this, I don't think, except for Kesda, I guess. But yeah, so it's a cool group of characters overall. I definitely plan on asking about Dragon Laguz eventually. I know exactly where that's going to be, as long as I remember to do it during that episode. But anyway, it's not this episode. This episode, you guys are going to get a completely different question, because what I want to know this time around is, what is your favorite boss conversation in the series? We're coming up on a really good one this episode. Probably my personal favorite in the series is in this episode. And in general, FE10 is sort of famous for having a lot of really good boss conversations. So I would not be surprised, especially with, I know a lot of people who listen and write in frequently are big Tellius fans. So I wouldn't be surprised if most, if not all of the responses came from FE9 or FE10. But hey, maybe I'll see some surprises. There's some really good ones in the GBA games. There's some amazing ones in the later games as well. Three Houses comes to mind as having a couple that I remember liking. I can't think of any off the top of my head that I like, to be honest, actually, but I do remember that one that's really funny because everyone makes fun of it. The one with Dimitri and Edelgard. Must you continue to re-kill, to reconquer, to kill and retaliate? That shit, which is funny. We're getting obviously way ahead of ourselves, but especially with all the three houses discourse back in the woodwork. Thanks to Fortune's Weave, clearly at this point being very obviously connected to Three Houses. Maybe it is a good time to bring it up again. I remember, I have heard some people try to defend that conversation with Dimitri and Edelgard, and I don't remember the arguments well enough to say anything definitive about that. I mean, not that I would even want to right now anyway, because again, long time down the road. But I remember the arguments being fairly solid and worth considering at the very least. So, I don't know. Well, when we get there, I think I'll have a good amount to say about that. Anyway, favorite boss conversation? Go ahead and leave your answers at ImAMeleeKirby on Twitter or Blue Sky, turnwellpodcast@gmail.com, or leave a comment on your listening platform of choice. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into our chapters for the episode, starting with Chapter 3-6, A Reason to Fight. When we left off at the end of last chapter, we got sort of a cliffhanger that was talking about how Dane would unexpectedly be joining the war on Benyan's side, which is the last thing that anybody would see coming, including some of the people in Dane, but we're going to get to that in a second. The chapter just starts off with a little bit of a recap on what's happened with Dane and sort of what has been going on in the meantime, sort of explaining, that they've been getting their bearings again, trying to rebuild, all that good stuff. Apparently, Izuka, I might have mentioned this at the end of last chapter, I don't remember if it came up there, but Izuka and the Black Knight are gone. They're not around anymore. They disappeared basically as soon as Peleus was coronated and sworn in as king. They're not around anymore. So that support that Peleus had from some of his more trusted advisors is really lacking right now. It's basically just his mother, who is very, doting and attached to him. But, as a result, isn't always going to offer the most sound advice, right? And then Micaiah is pretty much it. So, it's a little bit unclear. The future of Dane is kind of uncertain right now. But they seem to be doing okay. Now, Micaiah, for her part, is not really sure what's going on. She received, her marching orders, and as effectively the leader, the general of Dane's armies, she really doesn't have any choice but to proceed with what Peleus is telling her to do. Now, she trusts Peleus. She thinks that, whatever call he's making, even though he won't explain the reasons to her, she has the utmost confidence that it's in Dane's best interest for some reason, or at least Peleus thinks that it is. Soth, on the other hand, is very against the whole thing. He is, they talk very openly about how, this isn't what... This doesn't align with their values, right? Like, they're not bigoted. They don't hate the Lagus. They've worked with Lagus in the past, especially Soth, but even Micaiah, right? She in the events of part 1, she worked side by side with Lagus. And so she obviously doesn't want to go into war against them. But, Peleus really is just being very stubborn about this. And more concerningly, isn't giving her any kind of explanation as for what the reasoning is. But she is deciding to believe in him, stick to her guns, and proceed forward. The majority of the Dane soldiers seem to be pretty on board with the whole thing. I mean, obviously, we know that Dane is not, the average Dane citizen is not the biggest fan of Lagus, so a lot of them are very on board with participating in this war. In fact, Peleus has offered a bounty on like every Lagus killed or something like that. So they're getting all riled up. Interestingly, they do point out that there are a few people who are against it. But obviously, their opinions tend to be the less common ones. I think it's a really powerful statement about the people of Dane in a negative way, that so like in this scenario, right, they're fighting alongside Benyan, the people who up until very recently have oppressed them, have murdered their innocent civilians in the streets, humiliated them, took away their sovereignty as a nation. All of that stuff, apparently, though, is water under the bridge as long as they get to kill some Lagus, is sort of the impression that Soth is giving about the average person's opinion on this war. So I think it's good to see that at the end of the day, if in case you were starting to get a little bit too sympathetic to the villains of the last game, they have not changed all that much as a collective, which is a shame, but it is what it is. So as far as for what the plan is, basically Dane is to prevent the Lagus from escaping, because if you remember, Benyan is pushing them back after a pretty bad defeat at the hands of Zelgius. Everybody's trying to run away. Dane's job is to basically stop them from doing that. So that's the idea. And now we're playing as Dane again, where I forgot to mention that, but we've taken back the perspective of Micaiah and Soth and, the Dawn Brigade and all them. And we get the base. And there's some cool stuff I want to talk about in this base. First of all, the bargain shop this chapter gives us access to some pretty cool items. Specifically, there's silver weapons, which is nice, and ranged options in case you were running low on those from part 1. Javelins, hand axes, and wind edges. I guess just one each probably. But it also gives us another beast killer, which is the Lagu's effective knife that Soth can use, which will make this next chapter a lot easier, or arguably harder, depending on your perspective. But either way, it's a nice option to have. I always make sure I pick this up. You can also buy a physics staff, which will be handy for Micaiah, especially now that Micaiah is a... this is our first time using Micaiah since she promoted, I guess, at the end of part 1. She can use a physics staff at base. She starts with C rank staves by default. And also a torch, which is going to be pretty relevant because this next map we're about to do is a Fog of War chapter. So, look forward to that. There are some good base conversations here as well. Good both in the sense that they're like fun and interesting to read because we go through a lot of the characters that Micaiah has been with up to this point. The Dawn Brigade, Jill. I think it might just be those guys actually. Zehark doesn't come up, does he? Maybe he does. I don't remember. Anyway, it goes through sort of their reactions to what's going on and them giving their perspective. Some people are more against it than others. Some people are sticking with Micaiah because they believe in her. Some people don't really see a problem with it in the first place, or at least a little bit less reserved about the whole thing. Edward comes to mind, right? Like he's pretty much just, he's choosing to put his faith in the people that he trusts and not really worrying about anything else, which is, very much like him. But they're also very good base conversations in terms of the stuff that they give us. We get some really good items from these. First of all, definitely the most mundane out of them all is a Master Crown, which, as a reminder, I think I've mentioned this already, is an item that we can use. It's essentially a Master Seal, except instead of going from Tier 1 to Tier 2, it takes you from Tier 2 to Tier 3. If you're level 10 or higher, it just lets you skip straight there, which is pretty nice if we, especially in the Dawn Brigade, if we're trying to save on the amount of experience that we need to get people to promote. It's a good idea to maybe use this on somebody who you want to use for a little bit longer. We get a Brave Axe. It's given directly to Jill. The framing of most of these is that they're gifts being given to different members of the army by Peleus. So he gives Jill a Brave Axe, which is pretty nice, especially if you have been training Jill. This is really where she comes into her own, right? She gets to, slap Beast Foe on if you got it in the earlier chapters. We're going to talk about Beast Foe in a second, don't worry. And she gets to fly around, bypass a lot of the terrain and other things. And if you've been putting investment into her, she's pretty bulky. She can deal with a lot of the Lagus in this chapter and in later chapters, basically on her own, which is really nice. The Brave Axe certainly helps with that as well. Makes it even less likely that she's going to eat a counterattack if she doesn't quite one-shot an enemy. If she, she probably two-shots them with the Brave Axe. So, she'll be able to get rid of an enemy that way, which is really nice. More interesting than any of that, though, are the 3 personal weapons that we get for the starting foundational members of the Dawn Brigade. Nolan, Leonardo, and Edward all get a unique weapon here. And they're all, very solid weapons that boost a particular stat. So let's go over all of them. Let's start with Edward's. Edward's personal sword is called the Khalidbolg. I jokingly call it the salad bowl sometimes just because it's easier to pronounce than Khalidbolg. I'm pretty sure I hope I'm saying that right. I'm not 100% sure if I am. Now this is definitely the worst out of the weapons in terms of the stat that it boosts, because it only gives Edward +8 luck, which is not very useful. But it is, something, gives him a little bit of hit and avoid, some crit avoid. I guess, that's all fairly nice. But the main thing is that it's just like a really strong beat stick that Edward can use to really good effect. If you've been putting some effort into him, he does pretty solid chip damage with it. Or just outright kills, all these weapons have 40 uses, by the way, which is pretty nice. Next up is Leonardo's, Leonardo gets the Lugnasad. Again, no idea if I'm saying that right. But this one gives him +5 speed, which is really nice. It helps mitigate the lower speed growth that Leonardo has, to the point where, even though I haven't been putting basically any effort into this Leonardo, this is an almost base level Leonardo that I have right now. He was doubling some Tigers with the Lughnasadh, boosting his speed a little bit, which is nice. Actually, no, I think it was, sorry, I don't think it was the Tigers. I think it was the untransformed Lagus, which is definitely a lot less impressive. But the point is that a Leonardo with even just like a decent amount of investment is probably going to be doubling some enemies on this map, or at least not getting doubled, maybe by the cats, which is pretty cool. I think it makes him a lot more usable than he would be otherwise. And just like with the Kalidbolg, the Lughnasadh has a pretty high might stat, which is pretty nice. Low weight as well, only 5 weight. So he's almost certainly not going to get weighed down by it. In fact, I think he definitely has more than 5 base strength. So he won't get weighed down by it at all, even if you have a level 1 Leonardo. And then finally, Nolan gets the Tarvos, which is an axe that gives him +4 defense. Pretty straightforward, just gives him a little bit of extra bulk when he's using it, which is pretty nice. All of these weapons are very good, and all of them are exclusive to the Dawn Brigade members, which is really nice because, and we're going to talk about this in a couple different ways. The game here seems to be doing something really interesting where they acknowledge that your group is going to be pretty underpowered. That is a really common criticism of this part of the game, is that the Dawn Brigade units are going to be very underpowered compared to what you've gotten used to over the past few chapters with the Grail Mercenaries and the characters who've been fighting alongside them. But what I think is often left out of that discussion is how well the game compensates for that, right? In terms of, giving the Dawn Brigade these weapons to make it a little bit easier. So if you've been investing in at least one of them, which you probably are, then they'll end up, doing pretty well for themselves, even if their stats leave a little something to be desired. But also in terms of the actual game design and map design at play here, which we're going to get more into in a little bit once we actually start talking about the map proper. As a matter of fact, we're actually just about done here. We can wrap up the base. I'm pretty sure I got everything. I talked about everything. The only other thing that happens before the map starts is that we get a cutscene. It's jumps perspectives back over to the Lagus Alliance, specifically Ranulf and Skrymir are having a conversation. Skrymir is just being really down on himself, talking about how badly he messed up, talking about how embarrassing it was that he lost to a human or a Beorc, and how it would have been better off if he had just died. And Ranulf kind of gives him a little pep talk to try to snap him out of it, but seemingly to no avail. But then it shifts back to Micaiah, and we get right into the thick of it. So let's stop beating around the bush and actually talk about this map. So there are a lot of things that this map has going against it. It is a Fog of War chapter, which I am on the record saying many times that I really don't like outside of very specific circumstances. It has a pretty, in a vacuum, a pretty annoying clear condition, right? Like it's you're supposed to kill a certain number of enemies. I don't remember exactly how many. I think it's like 30 or 40, something like that. And that can be pretty tedious, right? It's not like literally a route map, but it does have like a certain, it's similar in that you have a certain quota of enemies to kill. So I can understand that being frustrating for some people. But the real elephant in the room here, the thing that makes this map and the other two Dawn Brigade maps from Part 3 pretty notorious and pretty disliked, I would say, at least based on what I've seen and heard people talk about this game, is that the units that they give you to get the job done here are pretty pathetic. Because obviously I've been dancing around this. I might have mentioned it a couple times, but just to lay out all the cards on the table, you are given your team from the end of Part 1 minus a couple, right? Ileana is in here. Let's see, Nyla is in here, Raphael, but for the most part, you're given your team from the end of Part 1. And they're at the same level that they were when you left them. And the enemies are scaled to be pretty threatening, and like scaled up to be at the same level as the part 3 enemies that you've been fighting for the most part. And as a result, a lot of your units are going to have a really hard time contributing. This is the reason why bringing up a full squad of people in part 1 is ill-advised, right? Trying to train like 7, 8, 9 units like you would in any other Fire Emblem game. It's probably not a very good idea. And I can really appreciate on a first playthrough why that feeling sucks. If you go in not knowing what to expect, you end up spreading your experience very thin, and then you get to this chapter and the subsequent chapters from Micaiah's perspective, and you feel underpowered, you feel like you can't do anything, you feel like the chapters are unfairly difficult. I can understand why that would be very frustrating, and I can also understand why so many people advise that you should put investment into Jill, because Jill, I'll get into this more a little bit later, but Jill can really trivialize these maps. I mean, flyers can always trivialize maps, but Jill in particular in this chapter can, if she's your sole EXP recipient or one of your sole EXP recipients, can really do a number on some of these maps. Now, I'm not going to pretend like this is some big surprise. I've done a very bad job trying to hide it. I haven't really been trying to hide it. I don't agree with this whatsoever, or I don't agree with the conclusion that the map is bad as a result of all these things. I actually quite like this map. In fact, I would go as far as to say that it is one of my favorite maps in the entire game, and possibly even the entire series. And it applies to all 3 of the Dawn Brigade chapters in Part 3, with one in particular being a standout, but we'll get to that one in a later episode. I don't remember which one. For now, though, focusing on 3.6, I feel that it is designed in a very elegant way to make all of these mitigating factors, or all of these detracting factors, I guess, come together in a way that really, really works. And I'm going to explain as best I can a sort of what I see in this map, and why I think the design behind it is so genius. And we're going to start with the quality of the units that you have access to, which is very often pointed as a negative or a criticism of these maps, is how frustrating it can be that the units you have access to are so poor. Now, just as a reminder, I can only speak for the difficulty of normal mode, but I think it's fair to assume that we're talking about normal mode here, because the average player, right, playing this game for the first time is going to be playing on normal mode. You can't play hard mode until you've already beaten the game once. So assuming that you are a first-time player, you're playing on normal mode, and assuming that if you're playing on hard mode, you have the knowledge and the experience with this game to structure your team in such a way to make it easier on yourself, right? It is true that the units that you have, the Dawn Brigade and Part 1 units, are pretty awful. But there are a couple of several mitigating factors that make this a lot more manageable than it might seem on the surface. I could, off the top of my head at least, maybe I'll think of more as we go through, there are 4, right? The first is the structure of the map. The map is laid out, so there's a section in the bottom left where you start, and you have pretty free reign to move around this section of land. There's not too much going on down here that would get in your way or cause you problems. But the rest of the chapter, there are other like scattered islands and pieces of land throughout the map as well. But most of the rest of the chapter consists of swamp that heavily slows down the enemy units, as well as choke points between fallen logs and rocks and things like that make it so that you can easily funnel in the enemies that you're fighting to attack you from specific positions. This is especially effective because every single enemy that you're going to be fighting on this chapter is a beast Laguz. They're either going to be a cat or a tiger. There are no other types of enemies here whatsoever. And what's interesting about the cats and the tigers is that they're restricted by the terrain. You know, I mean, they have pretty high movement, so they can still move decently far in the swamp, probably having more mobility than you, but they're still going to be heavily restricted. They can't go past the choke points, and every single one of them is locked to one range. So as long as you're choking a point effectively, you never have to worry about more than one attacking you at a time. Unless you're doing enough damage to kill one, and then it might, you know, get replaced by one who is standing behind it. That is a possibility. Although much less of a possibility, again, with the swampy terrain slowing them down. So that's two mitigating factors right there: the map layout, the terrain, and etc., and the enemy composition. Point number 3 is the tools, or are the tools that you're given by the game to make your life easier. The most prominent of these are the beast killing items. Soth's 2 beast killers that you can get in 1-4. And in the bargain shop of this chapter, as well as Beast Foe. Now, I'm going to put an asterisk here, and we're going to come back to it in a little bit as a sort of a counter argument. Like, here are the things that I could argue against, you know, what I'm trying to argue right now. But we'll put an asterisk next to that one because it's not these aren't the only things that are effective here. Those aren't the only tools that the player is given, but they are, you know, very, very prominent ones, right? It allows Soth, who, by the way, at this point, I mean, at least on normal mode, his stats aren't really falling off quite yet. He can definitely still kill tigers and cats very easily with the Beast Killer, and has stacks up decently well against them, although not perfectly. Another tool that you're given I don't know, the yellow units that you have access to in this chapter. I can't remember if this is the first time we're seeing yellow units in this game. No, it's not. We saw them in part 2, actually, but I think, and then a little bit in part 3. So yeah, we've seen yellow units a couple times. I've already explained pretty thoroughly how they work in this game. But it's worth noting that these yellow units, I mean, they're not amazing or anything, but they are disposable. They're supremely disposable NPC units that you can use to, you know, plug up holes. You can specifically tell them where you want to go and use them to choke points so that you can assure that one end of the swamp is going to be covered, so you can have more bodies and more manpower on the other side if you need to. Now, at this point, I don't really use the yellow units that much anymore, but they can still be very helpful. I usually let them roam around and you know, pick up kills, maybe soften up some of the guys that I'm working on killing. Because yeah, they're gonna serve you pretty well as long as you can use them effectively. And then this next one is a few turns into the map before we get access to it, so I'll save it for right now. All of this on top of the Fog of War, which really completes the whole picture, right? Because as much as I typically hate Fog of War, I would argue that this is one of, if not the only times in the series that it is used to the benefit of a map's design. Because with the Fog of War, you are left very... you are left in the dark, you know, literally in this case, on what awaits you past your defensive line, which discourages you from pushing too far forward. Now, it can be frustrating, and trust me, I know, I've gotten good enough at this map where I started to get cocky, and because I got cocky, I overextended, I pushed further into the fog than I should have with some of my units, and I suffered as a result. I ended up having to reset the map, I think, twice, because I kept overextending and getting my ass kicked like an idiot. Maybe it happened more than twice, to be honest with you. I started battle saving after 2 resets, I think, though. But as long as you're not like me, aka stupid, you should probably be fine. Now, I will be the first to admit that they are riding a very fine line here. They are trying to invoke a feeling in the player that you are out of your depth, the odds are stacked against you tremendously, and you are barely hanging on by a thread. You are using the terrain to your advantage. You are using every cheap trick and tactic in the book to just barely squeeze your way out of this situation. And that's a difficult feeling to create in a player without veering too far one way or the other. Either they make it a little bit too easy, in which case, the pressure is off, and you don't feel like cornered anymore, or it's too frustrating. They make the map a little bit too unforgiving. They make the enemies too strong, and it ends up just being a mess. So that's why I am genuinely extremely impressed that I can only speak from my personal experience with this game, guys, but part of why this game stood out and has been my favorite game in the series since I played it, a big part of that was how I felt my first playthrough going through these chapters, because that is exactly the feeling that they managed to invoke in me. And it is why, to this day, I still don't use Jill in Radiant Dawn basically at all. I've used her a couple times, but it's pretty uncommon for me to do it, because she is so strong that she alleviates a lot of this pressure and the tension that the game is trying to build up in all three of the Dawn Brigade maps, but especially this one. Well, no, not even especially this one. I'd say it applies to all three of them. I think that they're trying to give you that same feeling in all three maps, and I think that Jill kind of invalidates it in all three. And if you don't feel that way, if you think that it does a bad job and it's too frustrating or it's too easy, and you just want to spam Jill at it, I totally respect that. You won't get any judgment from me. Something about it just clicked in a way that felt really, really cool. Now there is something that I want to revisit, that asterisk that I had mentioned earlier, and it's about Beast Foe. The way that they handled Beast Foe in this game is very dumb. I don't think you need Beast Foe to get the best experience out of this map. I think it helps, but I don't think that it completely ruins the map or anything if you don't have it. That being said, they really should have given it to you in a more straightforward way, something less obtuse. Either have it be in a bargain shop in some chapter, either this one or one of the previous ones, or honestly, just put it inside one of the chests in 1-4 where we get it anyway, right? Because it's there as a hidden treasure that you need to send Soth around to get. So I don't get why you would make this luck-based at all, instead of just, making sure the player has access to it, as long as they're being thorough and with all the information that they have access to. Because if you're playing without a guide, you would have no way of knowing that's there. You would have to just send Soth up to get that chest and hope that, and there's a good chance that he will, but it's not guaranteed that he's going to get that Beast Foe scroll, which is very unfortunate. That is the one thing about this scenario that I would absolutely change, and I think would improve things a lot. Before we move on to how the map progresses, there are a couple of things that I want to, or just one thing actually, that I wanted to talk about, and that's Volug. So Volug, now, for the first time in the game, has the ability to fully shift instead of just half shifting. Up to this point, he has had the skill Wild Heart, I believe is what it's called, which allows him to half shift. And what that does is it allows him to stay in Lagu's form permanently. I may have already explained this when we talked to him, or when we recruited him. He stays in beast form permanently, but in exchange, instead of doubling his stats, he only has his stats multiplied by 1.5. And while that's extremely good still in the early game, in the mid game, it causes his damage output and his speed and his bulk to fall off a lot. And so you're kind of left between a rock and a hard place here. Incidentally, in the story, I don't really get this at all, because you would think that now more than ever, they should be keeping the fact that Volug is a Lagu's a secret. But apparently nobody in Dane cares. I guess it's fine. They don't seem to mind. I mean, you can have him walk around in Lagu's form around the yellow units. No one gives a shit. So whatever, I guess. But so you're left with this decision to make about Volug in this situation, where you can either leave Wildheart on him and continue to keep him half shifted. At which point, maybe his stats are fine, but they're definitely going to start to get outclassed by this point in the game. Or you can take Wild Heart. I mean, you can leave Wild Heart off on him, whatever, it doesn't matter. But you can start to shift him normally, like any other Laguz unit. But that comes with, of course, the downside of needing to keep on top of your Laguz transformation gauge, needing to max it out to make it full in the first place at the beginning of the map. So overall, it's a tough situation for Volug, and I kind of went over this. I from what I remember anyway, I went over this when we first recruited him and said that that's why it's kind of a rough job trying to use him. Now, I actually had a really great time using Volug in this chapter. I think a couple of things went right for me with him. First of all, I managed to get him to S rank strike in part 1, which is enormous. If you can make that threshold, then he's doing way more damage than he would be otherwise. Alternatively, if you don't make it, then he's going to be lagging behind in terms of damage for sure. I did also manage to get him 1 level up in part 1, and I don't remember exactly what that level up was, but I remember it being pretty good. I think he got a point of speed and probably also a point of strength. But I don't fully remember, so it could go either way on that. But the thing that I did for him that really solidified him as being a strong unit in this chapter was giving him Beast Foe. I put Beast Foe on him because it is not locked to Beorc units only in this game. Instead, anyone can use it, and with Volug's S rank strike now increasing the might of his Fang attack, that additional, I believe it's 5 might, gets tripled to an additional 15 might from what he would have if he was at A rank using a Beast Foe or doing effective damage on anything. So it ended up being that he was doing so much damage. He was one-shotting the cats, and he was not one-shotting but one-rounding the tigers because he was doubling them pretty consistently, even with only the 1.5, because I kept him half-shifted the whole time. I kept him at only getting that 1.5 times speed boost, and he was still doubling every tiger, and still bulky enough to not take very much damage from the cats. And, he was taking a fair bit of damage from the tigers. The tigers hit really, really hard, but he was still doing okay. He was still doing just fine. So, definitely, if you're interested in using Volug in the future, you like him, I would highly, highly recommend getting him as much weapon experience in part 1 as you can feasibly manage, which I managed to do while also promoting, 3 other units. So, it's definitely doable. And yeah, I'm just, hoping that he gets a good level up, I guess, or at least a decent one, giving him Beast Foe. That's the way to go, for sure, in my opinion. I definitely plan on doing this in the future if I ever decide I want to use Volug again. Okay, now, here's the problem, though. In order to win this map, you need to kill a certain number of Laguz, and it's definitely doable, especially if you let them untransform and then pick them off with ranged weapons from a distance. You can definitely get those kill numbers fairly high, but it's going to take you a really long time if you're playing super defensively. And in fact, if this is your first playthrough and you haven't been managing your XP as well as you could have been, you're probably going to be barely hanging on for dear life against a lot of the enemies here. So what do? Well, the answer is that you wait for turn, I don't remember, it's 5 or 6, I want to say. I could be off, but it's some number of turns. It was more than I remembered it being, so I think 5 or 6 sounds right. Into the map, you will be visited by the Black Knight, who is once again a fully playable and controllable blue unit. And he shows up, he says, "Hey, I'm here to help." Micaiah's like, where did you go? What were you doing? Or, good to see you, but is everything good? What's up? And he says, how about this? I don't ask you what you're doing in this war, and you won't ask me where I've been this whole time. And they agreed that that's a good compromise. I was disappointed to see that he didn't have a conversation with Soth in this chapter. At least I might have Yeah, I think you can initiate with either side in this chapter, so I'm pretty sure he doesn't, which is a little bit disappointing. But anyway, with the Black Knight, I mean, he's as strong as he was in part one. He's quite literally invincible to every unit or to every enemy in this entire chapter. He one rounds everything. He can attack at range with Alendite. He's just gonna destroy the entire map. So this feeling of hanging on for dear life, being pushed into a corner, with the payoff being that if you can survive long enough, you get this incredibly useful lifeline in the form of the Black Knight, was such a relief and such a cathartic feeling. And for a unit that, one game ago, end of the previous game, you hated, you wanted to see dead, you thought he was dead, right? And now all of a sudden you're like, oh, thank God the Black Knight is here. And how fucking cool is that, guys? How awesome is it that Radiant Dawn has so elegantly constructed this scenario where the villain of the previous game, both in story and in gameplay, is like, holy shit, yeah, he's on our side now. Like, it's so good, guys. I love it so much. And this is only, I think of the three, I'll just say it right now because I don't want to keep dancing around this because we're not getting to the other Dawn Brigade chapters in this episode. There's a little bit of a gap. I would say that this chapter sits right in the middle for me of the three. I think 312 is a little bit worse, and I think 313 is a little bit better. So I'll talk a little bit about where I think each of those maps succeeds and fails, because I think they're good in their own ways and struggle in other ways. So, but yeah, I mean, I hope I've given a pretty thorough overview of why I love this map, and I hope that even if you're not a fan, you can at least understand where I'm coming from, and maybe the next time you play this chapter and you try to keep some of these things in mind, maybe maybe don't use Jill, maybe try to play a little bit more defensively and don't overextend if you're getting frustrated, right? I think that it just nails this feeling that it was going for and just knocks it out of the park so completely. Yeah, I hope that was pretty thorough. There is something that I wanted to discuss regarding a really interesting scenario that you can find yourself in this chapter. This game brings back something that was introduced in Path of Radiance. I don't believe has been seen before, or had been seen before. I think to this day, I cannot for the life of me think of a time it has been done since. I'm pretty sure this is the last time they ever used it. Your allies can become enemies in the middle of a map under certain conditions. And in this map, the only time that can happen is with Zehark. Zehark can go talk to Mordecai or Leith. They will be on this map as bosses. You'd have to extend pretty far into the that's not entirely true because they also move towards you, but you have to be doing pretty good numbers in terms of kill count for them to get close to you and all that good stuff. Especially, I think they're I think they're more aligned towards the right side. So if you're mostly killing enemies on the top side, then you might not see them. I don't entirely know. It's a little bit hard to keep track of where they are in the fog of war, but if Zehark talks to either of them, then he will join their side. He will just become an enemy in the middle of the map. In fact, this is the only time in the game that happens, because other characters can switch sides in this conflict, but this is the only one that can go from blue to red, rather than being a in the only other example of it in the game is with Jill. And we'll talk about that next chapter anyway, but in Jill's situation, she can only go from red to blue because you're controlling Ike again next chapter. So anyway, pretty interesting scenario there, and it makes perfect sense for the story too, right? Because Zehark is very much against the persecution of Lagus. He was in love with the Lagus. He doesn't want to do this shit, right? He's absolutely against being in this war at all, much less on the side of the people in the wrong, right? So he can just say fuck it and move on. He does stay on Micaiah's side though, as long as you don't as long as you don't have him talk to Zihark to Mordecai or Leith. I actually don't know if they can recruit him, like if they try to go up and talk to them, or if he'll just fight them. I'm not 100% sure. Either way, there's probably boss conversations here. I'm not 100% sure. There's just one other little curiosity about this map, which is that if Leith is dead at this point, she will be replaced by just a generic Laguz, who is someone I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, but it's been a bit between, well, it's been more than a bit, it's been like a week since I recorded the first part of this episode. I'm just gonna be honest with you guys. I cannot remember this fucker's name, so I'm gonna find out. 3-6 FE10. The bosses are Leith. The boss is Leith or Kesda. And some of the information that I'm seeing says that you can talk to him with Zihark and he'll be recruited also. I have no idea if that's true or not. If someone can confirm that, if they've seen it themselves, please let me know, because that is extremely funny. Oh, here's a little fun piece of trivia. I remember, I'm on his wiki page now. I remembered seeing this earlier, but I almost forgot to mention it. When shifted, Kesda has a unique model not used by any other cat Laguz, a black cat with a white underside. That's pretty neat. They don't have a picture of it on the gallery, unfortunately, but I think that's awesome. Okay, so once you kill a certain number of Laguz, Ranulf shows up. There's like various conversations, as the map is going on, of Ranulf being like, "Hey, Leith, don't do anything reckless, retreat, etc." Leith basically says no. Our Laguz pride won't let us retreat. We want to fight. And Ranulf eventually gives in. But at some point, Ranulf shows back up and says, is talking with Soth and Micaiah like, "Hey guys, this is a mistake, you're not going to be able to stop us." And then in the distance, they hear Skrymir roar. And Soth, having fought alongside, like Gifka and Kainigus, knows what a lion sounds like. And he's like, "Micaiah, we got to get the fuck out of here. We are not winning a fight against the lion. Let's go." So they dip. But they have also done a pretty substantial amount of damage to the retreating Laguz as well. So for all intents and purposes, the vibe that we're supposed to get at the end of this chapter is that it's effectively a draw. Is kind of how I interpreted it at any rate. So yeah, overall not a great situation for either side. But with that all wrapped up, we can go ahead and move on to our next chapter, which is 3-7, Rivals Collide. So we now shift perspective back to the Laguz Alliance, just in time for Tibarn and Ike to arrive on the scene to help out Ranulf and Kainigus. And the four of them get together and sort of discuss what's been going on, what the situation is. More importantly, they start thinking of a plan of what to do. They're basically trapped between a rock and a hard place right now. Dane's not letting them pass, and if Dane manages to stall them long enough for Zelgius to catch up, then they're fucked. And that's the long and short of it. So they have to come up with a plan. The plan that they settle on is using a decoy force to engage Dane's forces while the main force moves unnoticed across the river. And they bring up, like, hey, we already used a plan like that before against Benyon. It's not going to work a second time. And someone, I think it's Soren, brings up the possibility that Benyon hates Dane so much that they wouldn't be, like, sharing notes with them. Like they see Dane as sort of, like, disposable and not really worth treating as a real ally, like a valuable ally. So Soren hypothesizes that maybe Benyon isn't passing along like all the intel that they have, which is fair. This, I mean, it's not really a big deal. I think it's maybe a little bit contrived, because at the end of the day, whether or not Benyon respects Dane, they still want to win the war. So I don't know. I guess it's an example of the aristocracy and higher ups in Benyon letting their own hubris, their own short-sightedness, come back to bite them in the ass, which is a pretty common theme throughout both of these games, especially this one. So I don't really mind it too much. It's just more of like I don't know how much sense that really makes if we're thinking about it realistically, but it's fine. So that's the plan that they go ahead and move forward with, and now we're taken to the base to prepare for this chapter. There is I'm not even going to bother looking at the list. In my notes, I wrote for under the bargain section, I wrote fucking nothing. I don't think there's really anything here that's worth talking about, just like some weapons or whatever. There is Olivi grass, which I like to pick up every once in a while on playthroughs where I'm using the Lagus, like some of the Lagus characters more consistently. So it'll be nice to have a stockpile of that for when Volug and Skrimir are some of our more consistent party members. But for right now, it's more or less useless. I guess it's nice for Ranulf to have as well. I guess because he's got some solid stats, and we're actually going to be recruiting 2 more Lagus characters in this coming chapter. So I guess it'll be good for them as well. There's a base conversation here that does give an item. It's just the scroll for the skill Howl, and at least from my personal experience, Howl is more or less a completely useless skill. Maybe somebody has more insight about it than I do. Maybe it's secretly like a sleeper really good pick to put on one of your Lagus characters. I don't really know. Let me double check what it does. Alright, yeah, this is some bullshit. If an enemy triggers a battle at 2 range and damages the user, it inflicts paralysis status on the enemy at a strength % chance to proc. So not a very useful skill, if I may say so. Even the most the highest strength on the Beast Lagus is like 40%, like 40 strength on like the Lions, I'm pretty sure, something like that, somewhere around there. Maybe Kanegas and Gifka have higher strength caps, I don't know. But even with a character that can make good use of it, or like more consistent use of it, you're still only going to get it to proc when you get attacked at 2 range. You could maybe pull up off some stuff with like provoke. Your Lagus characters are one range locked, so you can maybe bait ranged units into going for them, but it just doesn't really seem worth it for that setup, especially until we get some Royal Lagus who don't have to worry about chip damage eating away at their Lagus gauge. So yeah, I would at that point, like, why would you even bother with that when you just fucking kill them because it's a Royal Lagus? So yeah, I don't know, not really worth using in my opinion. I don't think I need to argue too much about that one. That was really all I had to say for the base as far as like story and items go. There is one more thing that I did here before moving on to the next chapter. I got some of my characters up to tier 3. I think specifically Mia and Nephany are now tier 3 units, and they unlock their mastery skills. I've already talked a little bit about how mastery skills work, I think with Alencia. But just as a refresher, every Bearer character who promotes to their 3rd tier in their class line gets a mastery skill sort of unlocked automatically. It does take up capacity, and it cannot be removed. But they're usually very, very strong. They're like a skill or speed something like that, percent chance to first of all, just do triple damage, which 90% of the time is just going to kill whatever enemy you're fighting. But on the off chance it doesn't, most of them are going to do some sort of secondary effect. Like, I believe Impale is the one that Nephany gets, and that's going to... I think that bypasses defenses. I think it's kind of like Luna. Hold on. Let me stop talking out of my ass. Okay, so I have the list pulled up right now. I won't go over every single one, but I'll read through a few so you guys sort of get the idea. So for Mia, she got Astra, obviously, as a true blade, is what the Swordmaster Tier 3 is called. In certain conditions, grants this user 5 consecutive attacks at half damage. That's Path of Radiance. In Radiant Dawn, it's just can launch 5 consecutive attacks. So you just get 5 attacks with no restriction on the damage output. And then the Sentinel, which is the Halberdier Tier 3, the Sentinel Mastery skill is called Impale, which says can multiply damage dealt by 4 times. So I mean, Astra is basically multiplying damage by 5. It you could argue it's like a little bit different because I think it also eats weapon durability for every hit that you do damage with. I'm not 100% sure, but it's still pretty nice. Just as to rattle off a couple more, the tier 3 for fighter is Reaver, and that class gets the Colossus skill. In certain conditions, no. What the fuck? Hold on. Oh, this is a mastery. Oh, that's the mastery skill and Path of Radiance for them as well. Okay, I'm sorry. The list here has the Path of Radiance description and the Radiant Dawn description, so I keep mixing them up. For Radiant Dawn, it can multiply the unit's strength by 3. Luna can neutralize an enemy's defense and multiply the unit's strength by 3. So it's not. So some of these aren't triple damage necessarily. It's multiplying their strength by 3, which I think would, depending on the situation, probably come out to more damage, I would think, because it's similar to FE4 crits, right, where you're multiplying the damage before, you're multiplying the attack stat before defense is reduced off of it, so I think it would probably end up being even higher than a crit most of the time, but what's another fun one? Deadeye can multiply damage by 3 times and put the enemy to sleep. That one's a very funny one because it's like if you're multiplying your damage by 3, you're probably just gonna kill the guy. I don't know if putting him to sleep is super necessary, but whatever. I guess maybe if you're fighting like a general or something in the end game and you don't quite do enough damage. So there's a lot of them like that. Most of them are pretty good. Some of them aren't great. Like the ones for, I think Flare is for mages. For Flare it's Archsage, which is the tier 3 for mage classes. Can nullify an opponent's resistance and restore HP equal to damage dealt. That one's like okay. It's not as super good at killing things as the other ones are, but it's like fine. It would actually be a very good mastery skill in a lot of games, but because most of the ones in Radiant Dawn are just cracked, it kind of comes off feeling very underpowered. The one for Saint, for the tier 3 of Bishop, it's called Corona, and its effect is can nullify an opponent's resistance and have their hit rate for 1 turn. That one's pretty bad. But to be fair, the Bishop Saint class line isn't really meant to be super offensive heavy hitters, so that one's a little bit more I think it's cool that it's a little bit more support oriented. Neat idea anyway. Okay, I just wanted to go over that real quick since this is the first time, other than Alencia, I guess, when we've had her for a couple chapters, this is the first time we're seeing mastery skills in action, both in Pale and Astra procced a fair bit for me in this next coming chapter. I don't know what the proc rates are. It doesn't say it on this list. I'd have to go into their individual wiki pages, and I don't really want to do that. So I'm just going to assume it's pretty high, fairly reasonable. Okay, now we can move on to the map itself, where there is a story scene. I think I'm skipping over some stuff here that I didn't find particularly interested. I know at one point we cut back to Micaiah and Soth, who were talking a little bit about the battle that they're about to fight. The both of them realize that we're going to be, or that they're going to be going up against Ike in this battle in the Grail Mercenaries, and Soth talks a little bit about how cool Ike is, as he is wont to do. There's a brief moment here where they compare Peleus and Ike, saying like, oh, Ike's the type of leader that can inspire others, sort of unlike Peleus. Not that I entirely disagree, but I think he's I always feel bad for how bad of a rap Peleus gets in this game, but again, most of it's pretty justified, I think, especially with how he is right now, to be fair. Okay, so now we properly start the map, and the structure of this map is really cool. When I say structure, I mean like the way it's like the goal is set up. It's pretty interesting. So basically, it's a defend map. The objective is to survive for 12 turns. And I'm like, I don't think I've ever played this map particularly defensively, but from what I can gather, playing this map like a defend map is like pathetically easy, boringly easy. So from that perspective, that's a flaw. If it can be beaten by playing in a super boring, uninteresting way, then that's, it deserves a knock against it in that regard. But what I like about it is that, yes, you can win by doing the bare minimum, but you are heavily encouraged to push forward and to play offensively, for a few reasons. First of all, there are a ton of battle conversations on this map. As you would probably expect, this is the first time that Micaiah's army and Ike's army are fighting each other, like full on. We got Mordecai and Leith in the previous chapter, but it was just the two of them. There wasn't really a whole lot to them. They didn't have much of a connection to most of the guys. But now we have, Brahm is here on one side and Meg is on the other. They have a battle conversation. We have Zehark. Ike has a conversation with a bunch of guys. Zehark is one of them. I think Soth is one of them. There's an elephant in the room we're going to get to in a second, but don't worry about that. There's a lot of different battle conversations here that I think, most people are going to be interested in checking out, right? If they're deploying a character who has an established relationship with somebody on the other side of the battlefield, seeing what some of those conversations might look like, I think is an interesting incentive to push forward. But then the other thing is of course the main side objective of this map. I mentioned, I think the last time it came up was way back at the end of part 1. I had mentioned that there is a recruitable character in this game that we can only get by fulfilling certain very weird, very arbitrary conditions. And it definitely doesn't make sense to expect people to know about that going in, especially since you actually can't unlock this character on a first playthrough. You have to be playing on a file with clear data for it to be an option for you at all. But if you are and you want this recruitable character, then what you have to do is you need to get towards the end of the map with Ike and have him fight the Black Knight. And both of them have to survive, which I'm not, obviously Ike needs to survive because otherwise you get a game over. The Black Knight needs to survive because, it's the Black Knight. You're not going to do any fucking damage to him. I think I did some mental math when I was actually playing the map. I don't remember exactly what I came up with, but I think capped strength Ike using like the highest strength sword available, which is probably either like a silver blade or maybe like a max forge sword that you can get. I don't know. One of those options, I think gives you like 2 or 3 points of damage. It's I don't really know. It's probably possible. I don't think I definitely can't use axes yet, so we can't use a hammer. Spoilers, a little foreshadowing there about something we can do later. But Ike. If you guys know of a way that Ike can like actually beat the Black Knight here with the proper setup, then I'm happy to hear it. Because I sure don't. Maybe with like weird skill setups, I'm not sure, but. Anyway, the much more pressing concern is that the Black Knight might kill Ike. It's if you haven't been, putting a lot of resources into Ike or a lot of experience into Ike at the very least, I think it's actually pretty likely that the Black Knight will one round Ike, double him and kill him in 2 hits, because the Black Knight is just insanely strong, really, really high stats. So your options for how to do this are pretty limited. Certainly if you have an Ike who has a high enough speed stat to not get doubled, that is a pretty realistic goal. You could just bait the Black Knight over and have him attack you at 2 range and then not get doubled and hope he doesn't. Well, he can't proc Luna at 2 range, I don't think. So yeah, that's definitely an option if you've been putting the time and investment into Ike. The more reliable way to do it is to give Ike one of the usable magic card items, so like a Reaper card or a Spectre card, whatever you have access to. I somehow got to this chapter without having one in my inventory. I don't know how I fucked that up, but I was able. You can still just buy one from the from the shop. It might be a bargain. It might be a bargain item. I don't 100% remember. But either way, you can get one in this chapter, so you don't have to worry about not having one. You can bring Ike to the end and have him use a Spectre card, and it'll do like no damage. In fact, it'll almost certainly do 0 damage. Like, I don't think there's any way that it would do any amount of damage. But the important thing is that when you use one of those items, you cannot be counterattacked. I'm pretty sure I've talked about this before, because this is a pretty common tactic for seeing in-game, if you want to, the boss conversations that some of the herons have. Because there are a good number of those towards the end game chapters, and obviously if you leave a heron in range of someone who's going to attack them, they're almost certainly going to die, especially if it's a boss. So this serves as a way to see those conversations without having to like look them up on the internet, or battle save, I guess, and then just kill off your heron and reload. But it also serves a really important functional use here as well. Now I am getting a little ahead of myself. I kind of just started talking about like side objectives and reasons to push forward, and now we're talking about the Black Knight and Ike conversation. But I want to spend a little time on this because it doesn't really make sense for me to change topics and then come back to this later. I'll just get it out of the way right now, and then we'll circle back to sort of what the actual structure of this map looks like. So Ike and the Black Knight have a conversation here, and it is the inspiration for the question of this episode, which was, of course, what is your favorite boss conversation in the series? Now, I don't know. I think this is 100% basically my favorite boss conversation so far that we've seen. I never like to say with certainty that it's going to stay that way, because there are boss conversations, there are examples. When I ask a question like this, what's your favorite X in the series, there are always examples in the later games that I might be forgetting about, or that I might not know about right now, that may change my mind later. I think it's pretty unlikely that my opinion on this will change. I think that the conversation that Ike and the Black Knight have here is just incredible. And what's funny about it is that it's mistranslated. Okay, so let's take this one piece at a time, all right? Ike says, let me pull up the actual conversation so I'm not just going off of memory. Hold on. Okay, I'm sorry. I pulled up the page of conversations for this chapter, and it's really long, and I have a lot of stuff to talk about, but I want to get through this Black Knight conversation with Ike first, and then I'll circle back to these later on. But yes, okay, so here's the Black Knight conversation with Ike. So Ike basically says, "Oh, so you were alive after all," because of course he's heard rumors at this point that the Black Knight was alive, and helping with Dane's liberation, and the Black Knight in this conversation drops a bombshell on Ike about how he managed to survive the encounter that they had at the end of Path of Radiance. And he says in simple terms, "Bro, I let you win. I sold. I literally just let you win." And I love this so much. This revelation and Ike's reaction to it being essentially, yeah, you did, didn't you? I can see that now, but I didn't think of it at the time. And the sort of back and forth that they have about what that means and why that may be. I think it communicates so much about both of these characters in such a simple idea and just a few lines of dialogue. This is one of my favorite interactions from Ike in the entire game. It probably is my favorite interaction from the Black Knight in the entire game. Some of the lines here are just straight bangers, right? Like, what does he say? You were a boy trying to live up to the memory of the greatest swordsman in history. Like, that's so cool. And it also betrays a little bit about the Black Knight, right? Where Grail probably is, if we're talking objectively, the greatest swordsman in history, right? That's very possible. But we also know that the Black Knight was trained by Grail. That's something that he says in the cutscene where he dies in Path of Radiance. is you think you can defeat me, the man who taught you how to fight. And so we get the sense here that maybe the Black Knight is fanboying out a little bit over Grail. And like, I mean, that continues throughout this conversation, right? Where he's like, I wanted to fight. I wanted to have a real fight with your father so badly that I let you live just so that you might someday be strong enough to give me that same feeling. And that's just so sick, man. Both of these characters are so goddamn cool. Yeah, I mean, there's really not much else I can say about it. I didn't want to just read it out word for word, because I thought that would be boring. I think it's such a sick conversation. And as I said, my favorite, definitely in this game, probably my favorite in the entire series. Now, here's the rub. This conversation, from my understanding, was a completely fictional addition to the script by the English localization team.
It's totally made up. Pure fiction. It's a total fabrication.
Now, I think I've probably danced around this a little bit before. Maybe it's come up. I don't think it's come up directly up until now, but this is the first time where it's becoming like super relevant. The Radiant Dawn localization and Path of Radiance to an extent, but I think especially Path of Radiance especially Radiant Dawn rather, is notoriously inaccurate from the original Japanese script. Now, the exact details of these changes and what the actual text and the subtext that's been altered, the details of what those actually are, I'm not 100% sure. There's a lot of different conversations that people have said, like, oh, this is different in Japanese, but I haven't seen a lot of documentation on what is actually different. It's not something that I've looked super far into, to be honest with you, because, I mean, it's not really my area of expertise, and it's not an area that I'm particularly interested in. I've actually talked, it's been a bit, but I have talked in the past about my opinions on localization changes and unreliable translation or inaccurate translations in general. I've talked about that in the past. Now, just to cover my own ass, I will, throw out the usual disclaimer of like, oh, it's a very complicated subject with a lot of nuance, and it can get very ugly if you let it, especially in situations where localization changes are made in such a way that whitewashes, media and removes content that is culturally or spiritually significant to the original text, right? There's no one size fits all approach to localization. Some people think that they know what the one size fits all approach is, whether it's mostly it's staying 100% faithful no matter what. I think those people are dumb. Just going to be honest with you, because I don't think that it's possible, never mind desirable, to never take creative liberties with the material that you're working with. Just a complete one-to-one translation, from a language that's not even structured the same way as English, right? If you're translating it into an English, into the English language, it's just not possible, right? Like, I mean, I'm not a translator, but every single person that I've seen who works in the field, comment on this stuff, all say the same thing. And I think it's, telling that all of those people seem to be on the same page about what a difficult job it is, and yet some people on the internet seem to think that they know the right way to do it. So I'm going to go ahead and trust the people who actually do this for a living. And that's not to say that localizers never, make mistakes, or not just like sometimes translators and localizers make actual genuine mistakes, like misunderstanding what's being said, mistranslations, things like that. But also in terms of like what to cut, what to add, what to change, those are matters of opinions that, I think sometimes they go too far in a few places. That's just a fact, right? So that's why I'm saying it's a pretty nuanced conversation that I don't really want to get lost in the weeds on too much, even though I kind of already have at this point because I'm rambling. But the main point that I'm trying to build up to is this. What do you do? How do you interpret, how do you judge situations like this when you, from the bottom of your heart, believe, as I do in this instance, that the complete change, fabrication from what was originally in the text is straight up better than what was originally there? The original Japanese script, the explanation given for how the Black Knight survives is completely different. What it says is that due to a malfunction with the warp powder, his body, the Black Knight's body, wasn't like fully tangible or corporeal like in the castle when he fought Ike. So when he dies, then it's like he like it wasn't, his body wasn't really there or something. And then it was like just his armor, I think, is what is the explanation that's given, is that only his armor was there, which is really funny. I mean, obviously, okay, so if we're taking this seriously for a second, obviously the Black Knight wears clothes under his armor, but the very common sort of meme, I guess, about this line in the script is that I will say it again, is that the Black Knight was running around in his underwear. His armor was fighting Ike, and it's so stupid, guys. Like, come on, can we be for real right now? No one in the entire universe would argue that this was like a good reasonable explanation for how this happened. Saying that he threw the fight makes way more sense, especially when you consider that after the events of Path of Radiance, Ike went on to get even stronger, way stronger than he was in Path of Radiance, and by the end of the game, he's still, at least in terms of like narrative framing, is still only just a match for the Black Knight. It's yeah, there's a million things I could say about this, and I already went into like a whole thing about localization changes. I did, while I was looking into this a little bit, I did go and look up some more examples of some of the dialogue changes. The biggest thing that I definitely don't agree with and wish was not done with the localization is that the entire extended script of the game was axed. In Japanese, if you play the game on hard mode or maniac mode, in this case, normal mode or hard mode, if we're going off of the English localization of those names, then there is a good amount of extra dialogue added that just adds a lot more depth to the story. Now, a couple things about this. Obviously, I don't agree with it being taken away in the localization. I could be wrong. I have a feeling that was more of a consideration for time constraints than like they didn't want it in the game for whatever reason. I'm not sure, maybe they ran up on a deadline and just couldn't get it all translated. I'm obviously speculating, but to me that makes a lot more sense than them looking at what is apparently about 5% of the game's story content and just saying, nah, we don't want this. That doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. So I think the time explanation probably makes a lot more sense. Either way, it's a mistake. They should have made sure that it was in the game before it shipped. But if it was like a legitimate barrier to getting it in there, I can kind of understand. Even if I don't like it. The other thing is like, this is a problem with Radiant Dawn in general, I would say, and not specifically with the localization of Radiant Dawn. But if you're gonna have an extended script, if you're gonna put all this information in the game, apparently 5% of the game's story content, why not just put it in the game normally? Why have like two different scripts that the game pulls from. It's not like the wiki didn't say anything about being like on a repeat playthrough if you're playing with clear data. Maybe that's what it is, and I just misread it, or maybe the wiki's wrong, whatever. It said that it was tied to playing on hard or maniac mode. So I don't know. It just seems really weird to like leave. If you're gonna go to the trouble of writing it, why not just put it in every difficulty mode? That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. So I don't know. Maybe there's all sorts of excuses that I could give. I don't think it was a good decision to get rid of it, but it's the way it was handled in general feels very odd to me. There's also just like a couple of issues. Was a line in a later chapter that creates a continuity error because Astrid says something about not having siblings when she actually has like 5 or something. Stuff like that. Overall, like I don't think it's other than the huge elephant in the room with the extended script being cut. There's a lot, which obviously is a lot of content, but outside of that, there wasn't really anything super serious, I don't think. And we got an absolute banger change in the Black Knight conversation. So at the end of the day, listen, I can look up the extended script later. That's all I gotta say. That's fine for me for right now. But I do agree with the criticism leveled at that decision. Obviously, I think it's a load of horseshit. Okay, that was a whole lot of time spent on a lot of, I don't know if I would call them tangents, but certainly they're not about the actual like content of the map. So let's get back to talking about this. So talking about that. So as I mentioned, this is a defend map. You have to defend for 12 turns while also pushing forward if you want to see those conversations and recruit that optional character later on. You want to push down across a swamp. There's like a little narrow path that sort of leads to like the bottom section of land where Micaiah and Soth and the Black Knight, all those guys are. There's big open areas of swamp that most of your characters, they can walk through the swamp, but you're probably not going to want them to. It's not really worth the effort. Instead, you can have like Har fly around and pick off guys from the swamp, or you can have the 2 new characters that we recruit this chapter do it. I believe it's 1 or 2 turns into the map. Janaf and Ulki arrive, and they're here originally as green units. You can recruit them by talking to them with either Rayson or Ike. You just have to talk to one of them, and then they'll both join you at the same time, which is nice. It saves you a turn, I guess. And both of these guys are pretty interesting. Obviously, they are Lagus. These are our first hawk Lagus. Not our first bird Lagus, because we had, I guess the herons, but then also Vika in part 1 was a raven. But these are our first hawks, and they're pretty cool, honestly. I think like the common consensus, which I'm inclined to agree with, is that these are some of, if not the like best normal Lagus, like non-royal Lagus to use in your playthrough, right? They're just super easy to use. They have very high stats. I believe, let me just double check their stats here. I believe, yes, so Ulki focuses more on speed, whereas Janaf focuses more on strength. And then I think they both have comparable, what's going on here? What is it? They both have comparable, like bulk. Yeah, I think Janaf is a little bit bulkier. It's about the same. Yeah, there's like 1 or 2 point difference. And they're good, and they're flyers, so they can bypass terrain. They have Kanto in this game. Thank the Lord. I already talked a little bit about that, I think, when Vika joined. But having Kanto makes them a lot better than they were in Path of Radiance, at least as far as like when they're actually transformed. Their transformation gauges aren't as bad as the ravens and the cats. I don't think they're the equivalent of the tigers, I'm pretty sure. So they got like the middle of the road as far as transformation gauge goes. So yeah, I think they're absolutely worthwhile additions to your team. They have A rank strike, both of them do, which hampers their damage output a little bit. But honestly, their stats are so high that it barely even matters. Ulki in particular has 36 speed, which I'm pretty sure is only a few points away from the speed cap, which is kind of insane. Let me check when Ulki max stats This is, what is this? Radiant Dawn. Yeah, okay, here we go. Yeah, the speed cap for Hawks is 22. 21, so 42. So he's only 3 points away from capping speed with a 40% speed growth, which for a Laguz unit is pretty respectable. So yeah, he can get some really high speed numbers. Gen F similarly. I don't think he's particularly close to the strength cap. What is it? 16. Oh no, he is. Okay. Well, yeah. Assuming it's the same for Janef and Ulki, I think they both have the same stat caps. Let me just double check. Yes, both of them are good units, especially if you just want some filler Lagus to slap on to use your Olevi Grass on in the meantime while you're waiting for the groups to converge and to be able to use all your different guys. So worth giving them a shot, I would say. I have used them, obviously. Like I said, a few times now I've used every character. I don't remember how well they performed, but I'm sure they were good. Alright, and that's really most of what I have to say about this map. I did want to take a look at some of those conversations and just talk about some of the ones that I found interesting, because man, there are a lot of them. So let me do that real quick. Okay, so first of all, I gave you guys a sneak preview of this when we were talking about the last chapter, but Har can talk to Jill and recruit her to Ike's side. At which point she can then have a battle conversation with Micaiah, and Zihark also has a battle conversation with Micaiah, as does Ileana. So the three characters from part 1 that could be fighting against her here all have conversations with her, which is pretty cool. Interestingly, Micaiah also has a conversation with Rayson, where they talk a little bit about how she knows Raphael. All of these basically boiled, like, I'm not going to go through every single one and talk about like the contents of them. It really just boils down to like everybody who fights Micaiah like understands like this is the choice that she's making. This is her resolve. Telling her to do this, and so they're not going to try to. Some of them do try to convince her to stop, but it's no use. Obviously, she's going to fight against us regardless. The last thing I wanted to comment on here is that several of the there are several other characters who can recruit either Jill or Zihark if you transfer support data from Path of Radiance, support data from Path of Radiance. Zihark can be recruited by Braum or by Ileana. And Jill can be recruited by Mist if they had an ace support in Path of Radiance and that ace support data got transferred over. But yeah, that's really about it. Most of the conversations themselves are pretty straightforward. You can go read them yourself if you want. Most of them aren't too interesting in my opinion. So I came back to do a little bit more for this section because there is one battle conversation that I wanted to draw attention to that I forgot to mention my first pass. And that is the conversation between Ranulf and the Black Knight, where we actually get an early reveal. If you manage to drag Ranulf's ass all the way down there and have him fight the Black Knight, for whatever reason, we get our first indication that Ranulf knows who the Black Knight is. He just says explicitly, "I've figured out who you are," which is really cool. That they thought to include that, right? Because we're not actually going to find that out until part 4, I think. Like when they split off for the beginning of part 4, when Ranulf and Ike go in different groups, that's when he tells Ike that he knows who the Black Knight is and reveals his identity. So I think it's cool that they included that here as sort of like a sneak preview, I guess. Okay, so basically the Laguz Alliance plan works. The decoy force has successfully stalled Dane long enough for the main force to get across the river, and they've lost, basically. Their mission was a failure, so they retreat. And that's more or less the end of what's going on with these guys. We do cut, before the chapter's over, we cut to Dane Castle, where we see that Peleus is talking with Lacane. Lacane is one of the senators of Benyon, and the implication of the conversation, I think Almeida, after the conversation, Almeida also pops up and talks a little bit about this. The implication very much is that Lacane has something over Peleus that he's using to, like, threaten him or blackmail him or something. But Peleus decides not to tell his mom about what's going on, so we as the audience don't find out, and we're not going to find out for a little while what's going on there. But it does seem like Peleus is being manipulated somehow. We don't exactly know how, but the thought that he might have failed, Lacane's kind of implying, like, oh, well, you let us down, so I guess we don't have a reason to have you help us anymore. And Peleus is, like, begging him to give him another chance. He's, like, super desperate. So whatever Lacane's holding over his head here is clearly very, very significant. And that's how the chapter ends. So we can go ahead and move on to the final chapter for today, which is chapter 3-8, Incandescent Glow. I don't have a lot that I want to talk about in this chapter. I'm actually going to try to speed through it pretty quickly, both because we've been yapping for a little while. You know, I'm going to start trying to wrap the episode up sooner rather than later. But the other thing is that this chapter just sucks and I don't like it. So let's just cut to the chase. Nothing really interesting happens here in the story. They're making their way through somewhere. It's like some forest. Is it the Serenus Forest? It might be, actually. They're traveling through some place, and they're trying to figure out how to get away from the Benyon army as fast as possible, because the Benyon army is gaining on them. They're losing ground pretty quickly. So they need to figure out what to do. There's a few different options, but they rule all of those out. The only thing, the conclusion that they come to, the only option that they have is to go inside some caves that they give a name, but I'm not going to be fucked to look it up, guys. There's some, like, they're like, oh yeah, there's these legendary, like, evil lava caves that run beneath the forest that's just like filled with lava and magma, like it's a fucking volcano. And then there's a path, allegedly, there's a path that leads out towards Goldoa, which is where the dragons live, and a path that leads out towards Gallia. So they're going to try to go in there. Initially they dismissed this idea because it's apparently suicide. The cave is filled with dangerous terrain and, like, noxious gases and all that. So they're like, no, absolutely not. We can't go in there. But Soren eventually, you know, I think it's Soren. He's like, well, if everybody knows how dangerous it is, they're probably not going to follow us in there. So let's just do it. And, you know, more to the point, they don't really seem to have any other options. So they're just going to do it and see how it goes. Now, once Zelgius finds out that the Laguz Alliance has gone into these caves, he's like, well, oh well, they're gone. They're probably dead anyway. We're not going to follow them into their deaths. But just before he can order everybody else to turn around and leave, a Benyon senator shows up by the name of Voltome. Voltome is a recurring antagonist we're going to see a few times. In fact, actually, did he already? No. I think this is the first time we're meeting him. You know, if he's popped up before, it hasn't really been particularly relevant. He is, particularly seems to not like Zelgius, in specific, although I guess the senators in general don't really like Zelgius, but he's pops up a couple times to be a thorn in Zelgius' side. And what he's telling Zelgius this time is that he needs to order a group of his men into the tunnels to follow them, and which is explicitly, you know, Voltome knows it, Zelgius knows it, he's sending them to their deaths, one way or the other. And Voltome's like, don't care, do it anyway. And Zelgius doesn't have any choice but to do what he says. So Zelgius himself does not follow us in, because Voltome orders him to accompany him back to the capital or whatever. Something like that. We get a scene here, back to the Laguz Alliance perspective. We get a scene where Skrimir is very obviously pushing through his injury. You know, he's still hurt, and he's trying his best not to let it show because he's worried it's going to affect the morale of the troops. So he's putting on a brave face, even though Ranulf knows that he's not doing too hot, but he's gonna push forward anyway. The base conversation here doesn't really give us anything. In fact, I wrote down that you get a daunt scroll at this point. I'm pretty sure that's from a base conversation, but I didn't make any notes about what all that entailed. I'm pretty sure there's nothing in bargain again. I think it was the same shit. It was like, boring stuff, Allevi grass, stuff I didn't really care about. So we can just skip right past the base this time. Nothing interesting. And we can get straight into the map. Now this map sucks. This is a terrible, terrible map that I don't think it's as bad as some of the stuff in part 1. Or maybe even like some of one of the worst chapters in part 2 was probably like the Lucia cave. I don't know if it's as bad as that, but it is on like the lower end of maps of this game. I'll say that much. And it's a route map. Most of the enemies are condensed towards the bottom. There's some reinforcements. There are sections of the ground that are charred. And if you stand in those, then you're gonna get blasted by like lava bombs, I guess, like big chunks of lava like burst out of the ground and or like burst out of the surrounding like bubbling magma lava. I never remember the difference between lava and magma. Point is, if you stand there, you get hurt. It's like the lava tiles in the Alib games in FE6 Chapter 8X and the Ellawood map for getting Durandal. It's just annoying. I'm pretty sure it does like a flat amount of damage. Maybe it's 10 damage. It's not really like a big issue. You're probably not going to die to it unless you're getting pretty careless. It is a little bit hard to see like where on the ground the spots begin and end, especially if you're playing on like a TV that you're a few feet away from, like I am. If you're playing on your computer and your face is like right up on the monitor or whatever, then it's obviously pretty easy to spot. But otherwise, you might mix up where you're supposed to stand. It's not really a big deal though. The main annoying thing about it, it does hurt the enemies too, by the way. The main annoying thing about it is that each time it happens, there's like a little animation that takes a few seconds, and it's just kind of tedious. But I just do my best to keep my guys out of it as often as possible. Oh, there may be a bonus experience. I think there is a bonus experience. Yeah, I remember. I don't remember the exact turn requirement for bonus experience in this one, but I remember it being like super generous. I think it's like 20 turns or something like that, maybe like 18. So really, really generous turn requirement here. If you know what you're doing, and I guess that's the main thing, right? Is that they want it to be they don't want it to screw over people who are playing blind, because there's a lot of reinforcements that you might end up getting tripped up on, but. If you know what you're doing, you can end this map like pretty casually, and I don't even know how many turns it took me. Probably less than 10, to be honest. Like it's not a very long map at all, and that's good because it sucks, and I want to move on and stop talking about it. Sorry if you guys wanted a little bit more detail on that. I just found the map to be pretty tedious. I don't particularly have anything interesting to say about it, so we're just gonna move on. After you successfully get rid of all the Benyon troops, they do come out of the cave, and in case the Chekhov's gun at the beginning of the chapter wasn't obvious enough, they don't come out in Gallia. Instead, they emerge from the other side of the cave in Goldoa, where they're immediately apprehended for, trespassing on Goldoan territory, and they get brought to the palace of the Dragon King Degensia, who kind of reprimands them for not invading, but like sort of stepping foot on their territory. Goldoa's position, if you remember, Goldoa's position on all political international affairs has always been strict neutrality. Goldoa does not take sides. Goldoa does not move. And this comes into some contention here, where one of the characters, I'll double check who it is. I think it might be Scrimir, pipes up and says like, "Oh, are you just gonna let us? You see these, these things happening to the Lagus, and you don't even seem to care." Oh, what triggers this? Degensia is like, "Listen, I'm not going to." Attack you or blame you for coming here. That's fine, but you need to turn around and go back the way you came. And of course, you guys just barely survived getting through the caves the first time. So Skrymir says, no, absolutely not. You're sending my people to their deaths. And they have a little bit of back and forth about that. Eventually, Dagensya caves and says, fine, you can pass through Goldoa to the Gallian border. And Nasir and Ina, who were characters in the previous game, I think this is the first time we're seeing them in this one, they come along and they sort of escort you guys. They have a little bit to say here about how long it's been. Actually, Ike says that it's been a long time, and Ina's been like, what? It's only been 3 years, because of course, the dragons live for a very, very long time. So really the whole point of this, and in fact I would assume the point of this entire chapter is to contrive a way for them to get to Goldoa, to flag up Dagensya and Goldoa's neutrality policy, as it's going to be pretty relevant for later in the game. They definitely could have come up with a better way to do it than this, but whatever, especially considering if the map was at least good, then I wouldn't care, but it's not, so it's a bummer. Okay, yeah, that's it. That's the end of the chapter. I don't really have too much else to say, I don't think. I love 3-6. I think 3-7 is pretty good, albeit, flawed somewhat. And then 3-8 is bad. I think it's a pretty solid breakdown, but also it's not like the worst map I've ever played in my life or anything. It's like mediocre. Obviously, in case needed explaining, the map from this episode that I like the most is 3-6. And then like in comparison to Alincia's Gambit, that's a very tough question. I've actually been thinking about this one for quite some time. Like ever since I started recording the episode, a few weeks ago. And I have not come to a definitive answer still. I got to think about it a little bit more. I think I still got to give it to Alincia's Gambit, but it's very close. I love both of these maps a lot, but I think Alincia's Gambit just has that spectacle. And that bombastic music. I love defense maps, and I guess 3-6 is kind of a defense map, but it doesn't really feel like, you don't feel like you're under, you do kind of feel like you're under siege, like more from a gameplay perspective though, not from like a presentation perspective. So it's a tough call, man. You know what? No, I've changed my mind. I'm locking it in. 3-6, new favorite map in the game. I like it a lot, and I've already gone over the reasons why I do. I just think it's such a good, it encapsulates the feeling that it's trying to communicate in the story. It captures that so well in gameplay. I don't know how I went the entire spiel on 3-6 without using the words gameplay story integration, but that's what it is, right? The gameplay and the map design does an excellent job of making you feel the way that the characters would in the story, and that's really commendable, as opposed to Alincia's Gambit. It's supposed to feel like a desperate holdout, but then you can fly down with Har and end it in one turn. So it just doesn't land the same way for me, even though I think the overall presentation of the map is a lot better. So yes, 3-6 is our new running champ for the game. I did already, kind of give you guys a heads up that 3-13, I like it better, at least based on my own recollection of it. Maybe when we get there, I'll change my mind, but I don't think so. I'll say that much. Okay, that's all from me for today about Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn. Let's talk about some news, because holy shit, guys, I always pick the worst times to go on like long breaks between episodes. Fortune's Weave, not only did we get a new trailer and we got a release date, we've also, at the time I'm recording this, have been getting very consistent updates on different characters that are going to be in the game. And, little bits of pieces, tidbits of info about them. There's a lot of discourse going on right now. I saw a post that was really funny where someone was like, Fire Emblem fans are pre-ordering discourse with the new game, which is hysterical. And it's exactly what's happening, right? The main source of the problem is that all of the female characters that have been revealed so far have some flavor of stereotypical, like traditionally feminine, like gender role bullshit. I don't know what the right word is, but like under their interests and likes, it's stuff like, oh, cleaning, cooking, taking care of others, romance, men. Some of them explicitly have men as one of their likes or interests. And I'm from the perspective of like I tend to be very middle of the road when it comes to these things, and this is no exception. I am of the perspective that I kind of get it. It's definitely not a great look. But also, like, can we be for real for a second, guys? Like, maybe the game will come out and it'll turn out that, all of these characters are obsessed with men, and, none of them have any of their own, like... It's entirely possible that the game will come out and all of the worst fears of the people who are complaining about this will come true. I'm not dismissing that possibility. At the same time... We gotta get a fucking grip, guys. The game's not even out yet. We have like 3-sentence descriptions of all of these characters. There's no way to know what any of them are actually going to be like until we have the game in our hands and we're playing it. But at the same time, I definitely get why people are sort of raising an eyebrow at this, because it's pretty strange. I'm not gonna lie. But I'm excited. I'm super excited for the game, to be honest with you. I'm leaning towards. Well, actually, no. I won't say which route I'm leaning towards, because that'll probably be my question for next episode. Is what route you guys are picking. But I'll save that for next time. But we've had a lot of characters revealed, and a lot of them seem really cool and interesting. I'm particularly fond of. Shirako, I believe is how you would say his name. I only know that because I've seen Zeta Gundam, and the villain in Zeta Gundam, his name is also Shirako. So I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing that right. He seems like he's going to be one of my favorites. So I'm looking forward to that. I don't know if I'll play later route right away, or if I'm going to wait and come back to it on a second playthrough. But it's probably going to depend on which route has the characters that seem the most interesting to me. And all of them have at least like one or two, so I'm looking forward to that. Anyway, I'm not going to be your one-stop shop for all the Fortune's Weave news. I don't think I could tell anyone who's plugged into the community enough to be listening to this probably already knows a fair bit about the game. I wouldn't be able to tell them anything new. There's lots of stuff you can look into there if you guys want it. As far as gameplay goes, we haven't learned like too much more, but it's it seems like it's going to be similar to Three Houses in a lot of ways, which is to be expected. So anyway, very much looking forward to that. I will definitely have at least one more episode between then and now, and I don't know. I have a backlog of episodes that I want to get to. I might end up... I said I wanted to get through all of Part 3 before doing bonus episodes, because I have 2 bonus episodes that I want to get to. But I also, if I wait too long, then I'm going to have Fortune's Weave breathing down my neck. I'm not going to get around to those for a while longer either. So I might put out at least one of those bonus episodes before Fortune's Weave comes out, which might mean that it's before I finish Part 3. We'll see. I'll keep it brief because this episode's already getting close to the 2-hour mark. Moving on to some of the stuff that I've been doing. I've posted about this a little bit on Blue Sky if you follow me over there at I'm a Melee Kirby. But if you haven't seen me talking about that at all, part of the reason that this episode took so long to come out, I mean, part of it was that I was in Los Angeles for Anime Expo. That had something to do with it as well. That lost me like a week between, flying out and getting all this stuff together, whatever. But the other, probably much bigger reason, if I'm being honest, is that I started playing Dark Souls. And let me tell you guys, Dark Souls is very, very fun, and that is in fact something that I want to make a bonus episode about sooner rather than later, because I want to talk about my experience with the series. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to share that with you guys, and give my personal thoughts on the series. I had already played Demon Souls, and I love Demon Souls. I think I will say, between the 4 games that I've played, which are Demon Souls and then Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, I skipped Bloodborne. another day, another time. I'll talk about that maybe. My favorite of the four is probably still Demon Souls, which is weird because Demon Souls didn't get me to go on this like multi-week spiral where I played Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3 basically back to back without a break. And on top of that, I have now played Dark Souls 1 to completion 5.5 times, and I beat the game 2 months ago. It's just so infectiously replayable, with the way that like the world is structured and the way that builds work. I've had a great time replaying it using different weapon types. And I'm excited to go back for more playthroughs in the future. I think I'm good for a while. I think I got it out of my system. I think 5.5 playthroughs was enough. I'm good for now, for the time being. I'm sure I'll go back to it sooner rather than later, but we'll have to see. So, and then yeah, there's been some other stuff here and there. I am currently very excited. I started playing Fields of Mystria, which is a game similar to like Harvest Moon, Stardew Valley. It's in that same vein. The 1.0 version of the game, because it's been in early access this whole time, the 1.0 version of the game is coming in about a week from the time we're recording this, a little bit over a week. Oh no, I think it's exactly a week from today, actually. And there's no indication that any issues will happen from transferring a pre-release save to a 1.0 save. So I'm just I'm starting that process now, and then by the time I'll have made a decent amount of progress, and then 1.0 will come out to give me more content and all that. So yeah, great game, highly recommend it. Very fun. Let's see, anything else? Yes, the other thing I wanted to talk about, I started reading a new manga. I don't read a lot of manga because I have really bad ADHD. I get distracted very easily. So sustaining my attention to read, to sit down and read something for a long period of time without getting distracted is tough for me. But I've been locked in with this one, guys. Blue Lock. Blue Lock is, I mean, everybody, well, maybe not everybody, but a lot of people probably know what Blue Lock is. It's a pretty popular manga right now. It is a sports manga about soccer or football, if you prefer. And it is extremely good. I'm liking it a lot. I'm already, how many chapters in am I? I think 85? I'm trying to do them in like 5 and 10 chapter chunks so I can easily remember where I am every time I load it back up. I believe I just finished chapter 85, and it's, the manga is about 350 chapters long, so, a little under, what is that? A little under a quarter, maybe, yeah, something like that. So yes, I'm a big fan of that, enjoying that thoroughly. But yeah, that's about it. I don't think I have anything else to report on. Just a couple things here and there. I finally caught up on Bleach. I've been watching a little bit of Lupin the Third Part 1 from 1971, but I'm only a few episodes in, so I don't really have much to say about that yet. Yeah, that's the gist. I can't really think of anything else as we're talking about, so look forward to either the next main episode or maybe a bonus episode coming out from me in the relatively near future. Definitely, hopefully, before Fortune's Weave comes out. I mean, yeah, I should definitely be able to get at least one episode out, probably 2, but we'll have to see. All right, well, with that all said and done, I hope you guys all have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.